One day and just took very careful data. What time did they buy these milkshakes? What were they wearing? Were they alone? Did they buy other food with it? Did they eat it in the restaurant or drive off with it? It turned out that nearly half of the milkshakes were sold before 8 o'clock in the morning. The people who bought them were always alone. It was the only thing they bought, and they all got in the car and drove off with it. So to figure out what job they were trying to hire it to do, we came back the next day and stood outside the restaurant so we could confront these folks as they left milkshake in hand. And in language that they could understand, we essentially asked, "Excuse me, please, but I got to sort this puzzle out. What job were you trying to do for yourself that caused you to come here and hire that milkshake?" And they'd struggle to answer, so we'd then help them by asking other questions like, "Well, think about the last time you were in the same situation, needing to get the same job done, but you didn't come here to hire a milkshake. What did you hire?" And then as we put all of their answers together, it became clear that they all had the same job to do in the morning, and that is they had a long and boring drive to work. And they just needed something to do while they drove to keep the commute interesting. One hand had to be on the wheel, but somebody had given them another hand and there wasn't anything in it. And they just needed something to do while they drove. They weren't hungry yet, but they knew they'd be hungry by 10 o'clock, so they also wanted something that would just pump down there and stay for that morning. Good question. What do I hire when I do this job? You know, I've never framed the question that way before, but last Friday I hired a banana to do the job. Take my word for it, never hired bananas. They're gone in 3 minutes, you're hungry by 7:30. If you promise not to tell my wife, I probably hire donuts twice a week, but they don't do it well either. They're gone fast, they crumb all over my clothes, they get my fingers gooey. Sometimes I hire bagels, but as you know, they're so dry and tasteless. Then I have to steer the car with my knees while I'm putting jam on them, and then if the phone rings, we got a crisis. I remember I hired a Snickers bar once, but I felt so guilty I've never hired Snickers again. Let me tell you, when I come here and hire this milkshake, it is so viscous that it easily takes me 20 minutes to suck it up that thin little straw. Who cares what the ingredients are? I don't. All I know is I'm full all morning and it fits right here in my cup holder. Well, it turns out that the milkshake does the job better than any of the competitors, which in the customers' minds are not Burger King milkshakes, but it's bananas, donuts, bagels, Snickers bars, coffee, and so on. But I hope you can see how, if you understand the job, how to improve the product becomes just obvious.
So hopefully that was informative and slightly entertaining. Rather than unpacking the job to be done framework in any level of detail, what I'm going to do is unlock the door, but then refer you to that link. It's an excerpt from a book called the Innovators Toolkit. Really, really incredible. I don't know how many words it is, maybe 1,000, but it's basically a practical, step-by-step approach to how to apply the job to be done framework. Really, really useful. If anyone's writing it down and hasn't finished, let me know, or taking a picture or whatever. As soon as everyone's done, I'll move on to the next screen.
Excuse me, is it possible to get the slides after?
Sorry?
Will it be possible to get the slides after?
Absolutely. Yeah, not a problem at all. Ooh. Moving on and sending those through later. So, when I was first introduced to the Jobs to be Done framework, I was actually working with one of Australia's biggest banks. And we were working with a group of about 300 product managers. One of the things that they were really, really struggling to do was design and implement product and take it to market and actually get any type of meaningful engagement, any meaningful usage. And so we ended up applying the Job to be Done framework and, added a couple of tweaks and bits and bobs in between. And I'm going to go there later, but this or a version of this is probably something that anyone that either works in marketing, product, engineering, design is somewhat familiar with. The thing that you're probably familiar with is user stories. As a user, I want so that I can. One of the problems with user stories, even if they're the synthesis of really good solid research, is that after you go, I want so that I can, you realize that you're assuming implementation detail. I want solution. And it's rare that we come up with the right solution that early in the product development lifecycle. And so something that's kind of been surfaced over the last 3 or 4 years, it's fairly new, is the concept of job stories. And I've got an example up here. The thing that job stories capture that align to the job to be done framework really, really effectively is first of all the situational context. So what position am I in when I'm choosing to hire or fire a product or service in Clayton Christensen's language? They capture the actual need, and they also capture the motivation, whether that be intrinsic, extrinsic, or both. And so, again, this is probably something that I can send out, but if you're struggling with user stories, if you feel like they're not giving you enough context, if you feel like they're assuming implementation detail before you feel like you have the right solution, give job stories a try. If you type in job stories into a quant search, not Google, quant search, there'll be some great results, probably from Intercom or Alan Clement on Medium. I'd really advocate checking those out. So now we get to the crux of it, the problem we're solving framework. And this is something that, again, if you go to that link that I'll be able to send out later or when I provide the slides, this is kind of touched on. And the problem we're solving framework is really a mechanism to identify the propensity people have to change their behavior. So how likely are they to use the thing that you're trying to design? And the simple way that we do that is through a Likert technique, by basically understanding how important something is to someone, simply on a scale of 1 to 10, and how satisfied they are with the way they're currently getting that thing done. So how important is it that you're full until lunch and you're occupied on your way to work, versus how satisfied are you with the way you're currently fulfilling that. And that could be a Snickers, it could be a banana, it could be a donut, or it could be a milkshake. And we'll just unpack that a little bit further. What I've done here is put together 2 really, really simple questions. And with Julie and James in the room from Yoti, this will probably resonate fairly strongly. How important is it to you that you're able to verify who you are when making online purchases? Now, again, that identity assertion isn't the only thing Yoti does, but I'll let James or Julie or someone cover that off at a different time. But it's something that we often have to do. In a MyData world, ideally, there's a really seamless way to do that. And solutions are definitely starting to emerge, but at the moment there's a lot of friction. And so you see the answer there. It's super important. I do everything online, and often the things I do online are really time sensitive. So it takes me 5 minutes to prove who I am. That sucks. So we got a 10 for that. Really, really important. We asked, how satisfied are you with the way you're currently able to verify who you are when making online purchases? These are the types of comments. It really sucks. I either log in with Facebook and give up all of my information, or I spend ages filling out forms. And of course there are other options than that, but that's basically the synthesis of what we got back. And so they said we're about a 2. Okay, cool. So across every answer that we get, we average that out. What we then do is we plot that on a really, really simple looking graph. This is a great way to articulate to teams, to stakeholders, the potential value that the jobs to be done of the customer segments you are targeting might have. And it's another way to prioritize investment, prioritize research effort, etc. And so where this one fell was right over here. 10 importance, 2 satisfaction. Quite interesting. this is the thing that I think is probably the most interesting about the jobs to be done framework. And again, I think Clayton Christensen articulated it really beautifully and probably more humorously than I will. But it goes something like this. The company that he was working for, I'm going to assume, was McDonald's, but it's just a fairly bold assumption. And they believed that their primary competitors, because of the way that they approached research and product development, were the other fast food chains. But it turns out the insight is that it's actually totally different products that can be bought from stores that McDonald's wouldn't have traditionally considered a competitor. And once you start unpacking the jobs to be done framework, and again, when I send that out, go to the link from Strategist, really, really interesting, it unpacks it in detail. What you might notice is that the competitors who you currently view as your primary competitors, they may be your competitors, but there might be others. And there are some really interesting insights that could potentially emerge from applying this approach. What we're going to do now is dive into a really, really simple activity. So, remember how we had the 2 questions? What we've done is taken those questions and plotted all of the answers out. Importance, satisfaction. There are 12 answers for each. What I'd like everyone to do it on your phone if you're, still able to do basic arithmetic, unlike me. Do it in your head, whatever. But what I want you to try and do is figure out what the average of these 12 numbers are, and the average of these 12 numbers are, and just note them down. So what we're going to do after that is plot them on the problem we're solving graph. And what we'll try and figure out is if we do have a problem we're solving, and that can help potentially prioritize effort, investment, time in that direction. So I don't know, how long does everyone want? Maybe a minute? Is that okay? Lack of feedback says that's okay.
Okay.
Real quick. Good? Alright. So, same piece of paper, if you have a piece of paper. I'm really sorry if you don't. Paper was a scarce resource. So it's not a reflection of how I feel about you, it's just simply, scatter plot. It's kind of like the way marketing works currently, I just guessed. Draw this out, can be as rough as you like. It's just to kind of get the feeling. So if you can try and copy that to the best of your ability, hey manually, do that. And then, what I'd like you to do is plot the job to be done where it actually falls. What we'll end up with is a less busy version of that. Everyone who has a piece of paper has plotted it. From a user experience design standpoint, we're failing. I need feedback. Have we plotted it? Yes, excellent. All right. This is the question that I want you to ask yourself. Do we have a problem that is worth solving? And what that means is effectively this. Do people care enough about this problem or this job to be done to change their behavior? Because if they don't, it's probably not worth spending time on. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to James.
you, Nathan. So yeah, I'm James. I'm head of UX design at Yoti, where we're building apps to help people take back control over their data and prove who they are. So once you've identified the problem worth solving, how do you go about turning this into a person-first onboarding experience? And what I mean by that specifically is that although the more or less users you acquire will ultimately break or make a success of a product, without them it cannot work. So the user need and benefit should always be forefront of mind when we start this journey. So I'd like to start with a little experiment. Would everyone please close their eyes? Don't worry, I'm not going to run out of the room and just leave you.
Don't take my wallet.
So I'm going to describe something to you. I'd like you to think about it as I describe it, and try and imagine what it is I'm describing. I'll repeat it a couple of times. A regular quadrilateral that can also be defined as a rectangle in which two adjacent sides have equal length. So I'll say this one more time. A regular quadrilateral that can also be defined as a rectangle in which two adjacent sides have equal length. Okay, so you can open your eyes. Anybody want to sort of have a go at what I was describing? Shout it out if you know.
Square.
Yep. Excellent. So the lesson learned here, is ultimately like what we shouldn't do is unduly load the user with unnecessary information. It takes far less effort to process that a square is a square when we see it, as opposed to having it described to us. This is cognitive load, and one of the first topics that I'm going to discuss today. As mentioned in the first slide, I'll also be talking about consent and onboarding. So what is cognitive load? Well, there are many ways to describe it, but ultimately it's too much choice, too much thought required, and too little clarity. So we already have so much choice available to us when it comes to products. Lots of competing products, messages, value propositions, and identifying the problem we're solving is just the first part on the road to launching a successful product. Now, this stat I think is pretty amazing. So the average app loses 71% of its users just one day after a download. So when it comes to choice, we've got to get it right in terms of the message that we're giving to users. Otherwise, there's a likelihood that they're going to drop off. And then when it comes to how much thought is required, did you know the average amount of remotely conscious decisions an adult makes each day equals to about 35,000? So adding to this during onboarding is only going to add to the user's cognitive load. And then when it comes to clarity, there's a fine balance. And the temptation will be that you'll want to tell users everything up front. You'll want to tell them absolutely everything about your product, wow them with like amazing graphics, possibly kind of, just want to sort of like keep them going until they're hooked. At the same time, you might want to kind of keep it super minimal in order to kind of get them through this process so they're kind of onto the home screen and creating an account as soon as possible. But both of these come with a caution. Try to avoid excess colours and imagery and layouts that don't add any value. At the same time, when it comes to simplicity, don't simplify it so much that things become unclear and misunderstood. So as I mentioned at the start, I work for Yoti, and the way that we have tackled cognitive load in our onboarding process is through rounds and rounds of user testing, and ultimately through person-first design. So one of the only things we ask users to do as part of the onboarding process is take a photo of themselves. By being yourself and showing that you're human, you are no longer represented by a username or a password or a number or even have to think about how you want to be represented. You're not presented with, we suggest your username could be this, or you should try adding a one or a. Sorry, I got distracted by the question. A one or a comma or something in your password. So you simply are you are you. So I've got a few takeaways in particular around cognitive load. So making people think or having to remember requires the most of the mental resources. So as I sort of mentioned, presenting someone with a long form, memorable word options, or asking for alpha forgettable passwords as part of a sign-up process is the most unhuman way to design, in my opinion. And the second one is to communicate your value proposition to your users in one sentence. Now this is generally, quite a hard challenge for people, but if you set out that transparent context up front to build trust, this will reduce cognitive load. And lastly, to reduce cognitive load, keep it short, simple, and human-centered. And make sure you tell them what they need to know at the right time. If we can make it human and not administrative, this is a step. Sorry, this is a step towards the most human and user-centered form in terms of cognitive load. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is consent, and this will be discussed, many times over the few days that we're here, I'm sure. But in particular, when it comes to onboarding, it's permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. Ultimately, what do you need from me and why? So, I really love this quote from Samuel Hillock of useronboarding.com. And he says, whenever asking for information from a user, I filter every decision through the lens of can this credibly be represented as being to the user's benefit in providing this. And I think this is really important when it comes to consent, because ultimately, what is it that I'm signing up for? And how do I know that the information that I'm providing is going to be beneficial to you, and what am I going to get out of this? So when it comes to terms and conditions, patterns, terms of service, these are probably some that you've probably seen and are quite familiar with when you're signing up to services. And essentially they're kind of like anti-patterns when it comes to consent, because these companies are just assuming that upon registration you're agreeing to the terms of service. They're pretty much kind of hidden, they're in tiny fonts, and they don't encourage users to actually kind of go and have a look at them and try to understand what they're signing up to. And that's typically because the way that terms and conditions are written, they're kind of lawyer focused, lawyer written, and it's just assumed that people won't understand them, so they just get hidden. So again, at Yoti, one thing we've tried to do, and this is with the help of our guardians. I don't know if any of you sort of watched Doc Searles just now, but he's one of our guardians, and we kind of go to them for advice, in particular things around terms and conditions. Now, we're not able to just completely remove them, but one thing that we were advised to do by them is to try and give users a bit of a summary of our terms, so they have something tangible that they can actually kind of understand. And again, through multiple rounds of user testing, as I said, this is really important that we get it in front of people and get them to understand, does this have value to the process? But we have this idea of a promise. Again, that was kind of mentioned a couple of times, and I think how much you want to hang on that is kind of up to you. But the feedback we've had so far is that people really appreciate having this summary up front of effectively what they're signing up to. And the other thing we've tried to do is be fully transparent. And so we've added a link around how we handle your data. And this equally, although the information that we sort of point them to is further down in the terms and conditions, it's up front and it's at the point that they're kind of entering into a contract with us. Another good practice is to kind of give people a receipt of these transactions. And Apple kind of go one way to doing this by giving you the option to sort of send the terms to yourself. Now, I'm not saying this is perfect, but it's it's a step in the right direction. So But why stop at terms and conditions? When it comes to receipts and proof of consent. So remember, this is about permission for something to happen. And one of our core features at Yoti is a receipt book. So every transaction you enter into, you get a receipt for it, and you have a copy of with whom and with what information you shared. So receipts, in our view, are kind of a step forward to having full control over personal information. So in terms of some takeaways around consent, so always provide a clear reason why you're asking for consent and how it will benefit the user in their ongoing journey. Always ask for permission and provide users with a copy of the transaction between you and them. And transparency is key when asking for consent. Try to remove ambiguity, be honest and upfront, especially if you've got nothing to hide. So, onboarding. So ultimately this is the process of setting up first-time users to be successful with your product. Now how you define success is up to you, like whether that's getting them to the home screen or whether that's getting them to take the first or the second action or beyond that. It's up to you how you want to define it. But so success can be defined in many different ways. But when it comes to success, again, you've probably seen a pattern here in terms of quotes. But I particularly like this one from James Clear, who writes about behavioural psychology, habit formation, and performance improvement. And it says, every time you make a decision, it's like doing another rep in the gym. And similar to how your muscles get tired at the end of a workout, the strength of your willpower fades as you make more decisions. So again, when it comes to onboarding, imagine you've got 20 odd screens to go through. Your willpower will diminish over time. So it's not all about you, it's about how, what are you providing for the user at the point of onboarding and how effectively are they going to then, make a success of that journey with your product. So here's an example of a couple of sign-up forms. Now the one on the left, it's not a value proposition, but ultimately it sort of says at the top very clearly what I'm signing up for. And they might not be the best. It might not be the best coffee in London, but at the point it's kind of giving me a reason why I should sign up for it. The other interesting thing about this is that they only ask me for my first name, and they only ask for an email and a password, obviously, because that's the norm at the moment. But there was a limited amount of information in order for me to kind of get started. Now, the one thing they don't do is they don't tell me at this point what they're doing with that information, so they've kind of failed there. But it's still a low barrier to entry when it comes to onboarding. And then the one on the right, which is another coffee app, they're asking for a whole ton of information, but they don't tell me why or where this information is going. So you can kind of see when it comes to, if we go back to sort of cognitive load and onboarding, this in particular, there's a challenge here. So Facebook, they ask for a lot of information when you sign up with them. I don't know how many people sign up to Facebook, or if you did, it was probably a long time ago. But these are just 3 of 8 screens that they ask you to kind of complete as you're onboarding. Now, one thing they do quite well is they do actually kind of give you a reason why you should add certain things. So in terms of what's your name, it states that it makes it easier for friends to recognise you, so at least they're giving a bit of context. But at the same time, what they're not doing here is giving any indication to the user how many steps they're going to need to complete to actually even get to a point that they feel that they've kind of started something. So, again, cognitively, you could be sort of halfway through this and think, how much more information am I going to have to give away before I actually kind of feel like I've started. So, equally, permissions are a very important part of onboarding, and if you don't get this right and you don't explain to users why specifically you need permission for something, there's a good chance that they won't allow it. They're perceived right now as kind of like a marketing tool, so most people kind of tend to deny these until they actually sort of see any value in it. But if you can explain the value in the context, they're more likely to accept, and then that will help you kind of increase engagement as you kind of further onboard users. So a few takeaways around onboarding. it doesn't necessarily end once users create an account, reach the home screen, or even take their first action. So onboarding also isn't specifically just around the kind of sign-up screens, in a product. Like this could start at the point that people start talking about your brand. So way before and even after. It's a continuous journey of successful actions that puts the person first in order for them to succeed. So it's not just about, like I say, it's not just about that initial screens. It's like how do you encourage them to kind of succeed every step of the journey they go on. And then really important, so show them the value of your product to them using it. Don't default to just telling them how to use it. And again, this is really, really important. Like just telling them what it does is not really going to help them. You need to sort of go back to this, like what is the problem that you're helping them solve? So I have a small task as well, and this is something that you can try and do now if you want. Some of them are probably a little bit more challenging than others, or it's something that you can kind of take with you and kind of think about it. I've got copies of all the takeaways, very old-fashioned, printed out. I'll also sort of share the slides as well, but they should sort of help you, in terms of kind of defining some of these problems. But one in particular, define your value proposition or problem worth solving in one sentence. This could be for the company you work for, it could be for your own company. Like, what is the sort of value proposition? And the idea of doing it in one sentence is all about, how can you sort of say that to somebody, in a way that's sort of human and friendly, and it's not, and the second point around consent. So define how and at what point you'll collect consent, and give users not only proof of this, but a way to retract it at any point as well. So I mentioned it's all about kind of giving permission, and it's sort of like an agreement between two people. Now, some might argue that just offering consent is like, it is a one-way thing, and once you've kind of agreed to it, then, that's one step in the right direction. But, why shouldn't you be able to kind of cancel that contract as well? And like, at what point do you kind of notify the user that has been cancelled? Is it in the form of like when you delete the app, how do you actually sort of tell them that, you no longer hold any of their information? And the last one, determine what key piece of information you need to get a user started. So this could be anything like I sort of showed, like from a name, or is it, as we're trying to do, it's just your face. But yeah, ultimately, like what bit of information do you need in order for them to sort of succeed in that journey of onboarding? So, and I'll just leave you with this, which hopefully kind of sums up some of the things that I've talked about and the conference itself. So, thank you.
Thanks, James. Just before Alessandro kicks off, and in the spirit of transparency or giving you visibility of the tangible progress we're making, I should probably do what I said I was going to do and talk about where we are. So we've gone through the problem we're solving framework and really, really quickly introduced you to jobs to be done. We've looked at onboarding with a decent level of depth, and again, like I can see a couple of questions up there, so I don't know if we're going to have time at the end, but I'd personally like to ask James a couple of questions about that. So we've looked at the impact of cognitive load in that process. We're now going to look at what I believe is a really, really brilliant tool that I was introduced to maybe 6 months ago, the consent journey canvas. And so you can kind of start to see a theme. We've identified a problem worth solving. We know, yes, this is good. We're going to invest some time in it. Maybe not commit to it indefinitely, but we're definitely going to invest some time in it. We're looking to onboard someone. We're looking to capture consent. Alessandro is going to walk you through the consent journey. So I think that's going to be really interesting. Alessandro, over to you.
Yes. Hello everyone, my name is Alessandro. I'm PhD candidate at Loughborough University and designer focused on UX and service design. 2016, I had the chance to co-organize a workshop on user experience and consent at Digital Catapult, along with Mark Lizar, who is leading the Real Consent project. And the focus of that workshop was about user experience and consent. And the core of the workshop was to start thinking about consent as a core element of the user experience of using any kind of digital services. And with the help of the other two co-organizers, I borrowed some tools from the service design field, and I sketched what has been called the consent journey map. This map is basically, the design of this map is grounded in three main ideas. The first is that consent is a central aspect of the service experience, which involves all the service phases, which are before using the service, during using the service, and after the service has been used. The second idea is that there are three consent phases. As with the service phases, we have a pre-consent phase in which the user gets information about the consent he has to give. The during phase in which the decision making is involved, and then the post-consent, which involves the consent management. And finally, that in order to use this kind of tool, we should see consent experience as a flow of user interaction with the consent touch points that I'm going to introduce you in a minute. What I realized is that using this kind of tool can be very useful for designers or practitioners in order to reflect and spot opportunities in order to improve the experience of giving consent, and put this experience at the core of the design of the service and the service experience, of course. So what I'd like to involve you today is to be involved in this kind of workshop, a similar workshop than the one I gave in Digital Catapult, but this time focused on a possible MyData personal store that I represented here just to give you the flavor. There is nothing like this right now, but it's just to give you the flavor. I hope that some of you would like to be involved in this workshop. I hope that at the end of my presentation we will have 5 minutes. I prepared some stuff that I'm going to introduce you. But before starting the workshop, we should better understand what we are going to design, and basically, and what MyData personal data store might be. I borrowed this short description from the MyData white paper that gives a strong prominence to trust. So basically we are going to design a consent experience in order to foster trust on users. Now I'm going to introduce you the tools that we are going to use. The first tools are personas. Maybe, hopefully, some of you are already familiar with this kind of tools. Basically, personas are the profiling of user you are going to design for, and I prepared that. I'll show you a bit. The second tools I prepared are the touch points cards. As I told you, we can see consent experience as a flow of user interaction with the consent touch points, and I'm going to introduce you some of the touch points very famous online services are using today, plus some I took from the relevant literature. The first touch point are short notice, which are a kind of visual summary of the service privacy policy. And a second touch points are icons. Icons are similar in some way to the short notice, but in general they don't use text and are used for web browsers. Third touch point are the rating platform. Maybe some of you already know this kind of platform. For instance, terms of service didn't read of privacy grade. Are two different platforms for their scope, but also in the way they are designed. For instance, terms of service didn't read is a bottom-up platform where people can comment terms of service of relevant services, something like that. And privacy grade is a top-down rating system, platform system. Another important touch point, in my point of view, is the one that has been recently introduced, for instance, by Google, which is a kind of overview of the service commitment to privacy in a way that is very easy to access and sometimes even fun to read, with illustrations, videos, and something like that. Another important touch point, my PhD research is basically based on feedback. Feedback is a dynamic and event-led way to notify user the systems, how the systems collect and manage the user's personal information with different levels of granularity. There are some good examples of feedback right now. For instance, if you use Glossary, you can see the networks that are trying to collect your data. Or, for instance, Google has implemented kind of logs of your search using using Google. Another touch point, of course, that we all know are privacy policy and terms of use. That, of course, we all know this, and some services has implemented a better way to allow user to go through this kind of documents that sometimes people are not really keen to read because are very long. And finally, another important touch point, of course, is the dashboard, which is a collection of controls that can be used by the user in order to grant or deny access to fine-grained access to their personal information for the service. And as I'm going to show you, all these touch points is represented through the cards that are there. And plus, I hope that using the canvas during this workshop, you will realize that some touch points are currently missing, so you can design your own using this card, which is basically an empty one in which you can sketch your own touch point, your own tool, in order to improve the user experience. Finally, the last element of the workshop is the simplified version of the consent journey canvas that we used at Digital Catapult. And it has 5 main entries. The first one are the service phases, in which you can link the touch points to the relevant phase of the service. So before, while using the service, and after the service has been used. The second entry is the consent phase, of course, in which you can place the cards, the touch points, in order to design the flow of user interaction with the consent touch points. The third entry is the time, in which you can imagine if the user will spend more time of few time reading or interacting with that touch point. Of course, touch point can provide information, guidance, or controls for real interaction. And another important entry is trust. Trust is, of course, is the core part of the design of this kind of consent experience, but is also, of course, a compelling concept. In this way, that we should understand whether interacting with that touch point will improve the trust level of the users. Of course, it's hard to treat trust in this way because it's basically an emotion. But I think that main advantage of using tools like this is that a big, complex process can be split in many parts and analyzed part by part. And in general, this implies to add a value, a mapping something, for instance, the emotion or the experience or the empathy user has interacting with a specific part of the service. And so in this case, I would like you to think trust as a positive emotion and map whether the user interacts with the touch point may improve trust with the service. And finally, the last entry is a description of what the user is looking for, interacting or go through the touch point. This is, of course, a very important task, because if you do carefully this task, you can literally start shaping the tool in order to match the user expectation and improve their experience. So, okay, so I hope that some of you are maybe interested in doing this workshop now. This activity, we should have 9 minutes. Probably is not enough to do the whole workshop and present the outcomes, but maybe some of you might be interested in the workshop. And I prepared the material there. The problem is that, unfortunately, I prepared the material just for 3 groups, so maybe you can form bigger groups and start using the tools.
Within the time that we had, we've tried to look at what does a dynamic consent experience look like. We know that consent doesn't necessarily only flow one way. We know now through Yoti it can potentially be dynamic, and we know now through Alessandro's consent journey canvas that we didn't get finished, obviously, that there are multiple consent touch points within a customer journey. So that's looking at the ongoing use of a product, not just onboarding. What Erwin's going to take us through, and I think he's done a brilliant job of this, is anyone familiar with Nirial's hook model? You guys are going to learn something really, really awesome. What he's done is add a sort of privacy stamp to it. Brilliant. So, Erwin, take it away.
Hello. Cool. Sorry, works. Hi. My name is Erwin Kroon. Short introduction. Who am I? I'm a product architect at MyData. We sort of described our product yesterday, so if you want to know more about it, you can just watch the videos from yesterday. I'm gonna watch them all myself, so we'll be fine. I'm not really a design person. I'm more from a technical and business background, so I like to program myself. So I'm not sure who likes it more, but very cool to try it. And I like to try to solve like the personal problem of the privacy user experience with technical stuff, but before that you also need to solve the sort of usability of your product. So what are we going to do? I'm going to quickly explain what is the hook model, because I didn't saw anyone raise a hand, so it will be necessary. Then we're going to fill out a hook model canvas with a very popular app, I wish. Then I will quickly touch on the implications of personal data processing. So yesterday, the French person, got his name, sorry, from the EU, he talked about the new EU laws and so on. So I will quickly give a short summary of that. And then I will introduce an extended hook model context, so how to use with privacy. So there's a book about the hook model, so I can definitely recommend it. Just read the book. It's sort of doing design issues and also backs it up with scientific data, so that's kind of cool, I would say. So what's the hook model? So the hook model, so what it said, how to build habit-forming products. So let's quickly just say, your mobile phone, as an example. So the hook model starts with like a trigger. Why do you want to do something? You get triggered. You can have external triggers, so you can have like a phone is ringing. Okay, cool, external trigger. Internal trigger. Okay, I want to call someone because I'm bored, whatever, I need something from them. So then there's an action. It's the simplest thing to get the thing done that has to be done. So can be just picking up the phone because it's ringing. For actions, you also need motivation. So maybe when you see that number of those whatever people you don't want to call to, you don't have motivations, you won't do the action. And for that, you also have to be aware that if something is very taxing on your mind, you have to actually be aware of it, that people will have less motivation to do something. After the action, there will be like a variable reward. So that will be something that gives you a reward that's not predictable. Something is not engaging if you know exactly what you get. So telephone example, you pick up the phone because maybe you get called and maybe something happened, whatever. So if you exactly know it's this telemarketer gonna ask me if I want to have a new bank account or whatever, you're like, I know what's happening, whatever, not interested. Okay, so last step is investment. So this is like the sort of thing, little bit of work you have to do, or something that aligns up the next trigger. So by calling someone, you give someone your telephone number, and the investment is they know your telephone number so they can call you back. So there's like a new trigger aligned. So the book goes into depth a lot better, but this is like the main gist of it. So so now we need to do a short exercise. So for that, okay, who knows Pokemon Go? At least a bit.
Yay!
Yeah? Okay, cool. For the people not knowing it, why? And it's like you walk like this to the city, and then you find Pokemon. That's like cool.
And you've got to catch them all.
You gotta catch them all. Yeah. Okay, so it's all about walking to the city, finding Pokemon, and of course they're sending GPS coordinates to them or whatever. So there is some privacy issues there, I guess. So, but let's start. Just little, nurture. So let's start with the three. Maybe we have to be a little bit so late. Make it 2 minutes or 1 minute of just whatever. Just go to this canvas and just say, okay, what could be a trigger? Am I bored? Then what's the simplest action? So if you know the Pokemon, you can also do it for like your own application. Doesn't really matter. Just try to think of some potential things you can do for every step. So you can think about it, and then I will go to my solutions. But give yourself like some time.
If you've got any burning questions as well, throw them up on the screen. Not literally, like type them in and they'll go up there.
Okay. Probably not 2 minutes, but hey. Puzzle answers. So for triggers, boredom, just procrastination, or maybe because your colleagues are playing and you think, well, if they're not working, I'm not going to work. Simplest action would be, okay, I'm bored, so open the app, and okay, cool, are there any Pokemons around? My variable reward will be, oh yeah, Pikachu, you know, because, yeah, seriously, that's like, yeah, okay, I don't have it, shit. So other random Pokemons, and the investment would be like, I can evolve them. It's a simple thing. I can just brag to my friends, I have this one. So the simple stuff. Okay, so quick to some more actual definition stuff. So this is like an abbreviation of the GDPR definitions of consent to processing of personal data. So personal data, any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person, processing any set of operations which is performed on personal data, automated or not, so it doesn't really matter, and consent. Agreeing with a clear affirmative action to the processing of data. So this is actually what in 2 years people have to build in apps. So wow, difficult. Also, if you want to make engaging products. So some complications that arise from this stuff. From now on, the simplest action is not always what is required. So maybe I only want to open the app and I want to start catching Pokemons or whatever, and then they ask me, oh, you have to do something. Please fill out this consent form. But yeah, it doesn't gonna work. It's not very simple. It breaks the cycle. Also, just giving consent for consenting is not really engaging. So privacy is something that's sort of irritating. It's the same as security. Changing your password and so on. It's all because people want it. Not because I want it, but because someone tells me it's important. And privacy is important. I want to use it, but I don't want to do something. So the last point is sometimes you cannot really ask for consent because there would be no application. So if I want to use Pokemon Go, I sort of have to agree with doing something with my location, otherwise there would be no game. So I think that always explicit consent is not something that you can always do, because sometimes the application has very minimal requirements. Sometimes they need something. Oh, sorry. So a solution for this is model consent as a hook cycle within the hook cycle. So we just add another loop and then we get to this. So instead of seeing it as a separate part, privacy, we're just going to have in the action, we're going to piggyback on the existing action. So could be opening the app. Then there will be a consent action or just an information step. But let's say that the user at least has the ability or the option to say okay or skip. And now it gets a bit sketchy because models are always sort of models, so they don't fit perfectly. So then there's the variable reward, but you will actually be the expectation of a variable reward. So you can give the user like examples. If you say okay to this privacy you are giving up, you can sort of expect these features. So you will sell the product to them. And after that, there will also be the expectation of investment. So if I can store location data, then I can give you more triggers or whatever. So this is something in the future, not happening right now. And then the rest of the cycle will be just, okay, go to the variable reward and investment. Quick example. Google Maps, if you open it, you update it in the last month or something, they open and they give you the option that they can, it's very small, but it says Google really needs, not sure, to periodically, I need some water, sorry, but store your location to improve route recommendation and so on. And then they give you the option, yes, I'm in, or skip. I skipped, because I have no clue why they would need my location to give me the bars in Helsinki. Okay, well, I can find them out. So, another short assignment. Try to fit in the location consent into Pokemon Go. So, sort of, which features can I sell to the user, and for which they would give me their location. So just think about it. If you're unsure, just try something up, and I will come back in 2 minutes. So.
No explicit consent algorithm. No, but they're given. They are using it. Yeah, so what you're saying is it's not asking.
So
No, it's implicit consent.
this is not.
That's very arguable. Well, I'm not saying whether it's justifiable. Yeah. But you're asking us to propose how Nintendo can put in something extra that creates the need for users to give consent.
Within the context of the general data protection
Okay,
regulation.
so how to apply it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's continue. So possible answers are just so the action would be still opening the app and then piggyback into it, and then there is like probably 2 possible consent actions. So I can inform about the location story. So I need to do something with your location because we need to check if people are cheating. So if I store your data, or I'm going to store your data because I need to know if you're sort of using like a GPS fake emulated thingy, so I can jump around the world. So I need to store it. An option would be I can store your location more often or always, so I can actually make sure there are Pokemons in your area, because that's a real problem. You try to play Pokemon and then you're at home and I have no Pokestops. I have to get outside to get to a Pokestop. Oh man, it's awful. Because I like programming, so I'm always in the cellar. And, yeah, so we need something there. So, well, this reward would be okay, no cheaters or more Pokemons. And the investment would be okay. I can expect that I actually have a chance defeating a gym because there are no people cheating and also more Pokemon. So very exciting for me. So this could be it. So short summary. So the hook model focuses on triggers. So something's going to trigger me, internal, external. Then I will have to have the most simple action to get something done. It will give me variable rewards because every time the same thing happening is not very engaging. And this, after when you get some investment of a user, you get the user to come back. When we want to model consent in this model, in this hook model, then we sort of have to model it inside the hook model. And the most important part is to model the variable rewards and the investment as sort of future expectations. And then we can actually read the book, apply it, and actually be ready for the GDPR in 2018 and still have an app that people actually want to use. So let's try it. Some references. Pokemon, yeah. And this is me. You can follow me on Twitter, but I never post, so doesn't really help. You can ask me questions if you want. So, thank you.
Cool. Thanks.